The Magician King is the sequel to The Magicians. And The Magicians was about this guy named Quentin who went to a secret school for magic, and then horrible things happened to him. And The Magician King is also about horrible things happening to Quentin, but it is equally about a character named Julia. Julia is Quentin's chum from high school who had a big crush on. And when Quentin sort of took the entrance exam for the school for magic, college for magic that he went to, Brakevilles, he got in. Julia took the same exam, but Julia didn't get in. And they sort of magically fogged her memory of that experience so that she wouldn't remember that magic was real, and so on. But they didn't quite fog it completely, and she is dogged by this nagging sense that something strange happened to her, and that, you know, she has these vague sort of memory flashes of being at the school for magic, and it really acts on her like a kind of, almost sort of a psychotic break. Her life really begins to fall apart. She becomes sort of obsessively haunted by these memories. Julia was inspired for me by one of my favorite characters from Harry Potter, Dudley Dursley. Dudley, of course, being Harry's oafish, morbidly obese cousin. Dudley, of course, knows that magic is real too, because he knows that Harry can do magic. And I always felt as though Rowling sort of missed a trick with Dudley, that there was a great deal of pathos to Dudley. And if I personally, you know, found out that my, you know, my little puke of a cousin who was living with my family got to go to a school for magic and I didn't, I would be utterly consumed with envy and this question of why did he get to go and I didn't. Strangely, I actually met J.K. Rowling on one occasion and I made this exact speech to her and it made no impression on her whatsoever. So hopefully it will make slightly more of an impression on you. Okay, 6 minutes, it's about to begin. Oh, the other thing is the way that the way things start to unravel for Julia is that she realizes she gets a social studies paper that she wrote back from her teacher. She's a senior in high school, and she begins to realize that she did not write that paper. That's sort of the clue that starts everything, the domino that starts everything falling apart. A funny thing happened to Julia after that business with her fake social studies paper. A magic trick, you might even call it. Or once there'd been only one Julia, there were now two Julias. One for each set of memories. The Julia that went with the first set, the normal set, the one where she wrote the paper and went home and had dinner, did normal Julia things. She went to school, she did her homework, she played the oboe, she finally slept with James, which she'd kind of been meaning to do anyway, but for some reason had been putting off. But there was a second, stranger Julia, growing inside the first Julia, like a parasite or a horrible tumor. First it was tiny, the size of a bacterium, a single cell of doubt. But it divided and divided and grew and grew. This second Julia wasn't interested in school, or the oboe, or even James, particularly. The problem was that Julia was smart, and Julia was interested in the truth. She didn't like inconsistencies, and she didn't let go until they were resolved, ever. When she was 5, she wanted to know why Goofy could talk and Pluto couldn't. How could one dog have another dog for a pet, and one be sentient and the other not? Likewise, she wanted to know who the lazy fucker was who wrote her paper on intentional communities for her and used Wikipedia as a source. Granted that the answer, the nefarious agents of a secret school for wizards in upstate New York, was not a league-leadingly plausible answer to her question, but it was the answer that fit her memories, and those memories were getting sharper all the time. And as they got sharper, the second Julia grew stronger and stronger, and every bit of strength she gained, she took away from the first Julia, who got weaker and thinner to the point where she was practically transparent. The parasite behind the mask of her face became almost visible. Julia was dipping a toe in the pool of bad behavior and finding that the temperature was just right. It was fun being a problem. Julia had been very, very good for a very long time. And the funny thing about that was, if you're too good too much of the time, people start to forget about you. You're not a problem. so people can strike you off their list of things to worry about. Nobody makes a fuss over you. They make a fuss over the bad girls. In a quiet way. Second Julia was causing a bit of a fuss for once in her life, and it felt good. Then Quentin came to visit. She'd always liked Quentin, basically. He was sarcastic and spookily smart, and on some level, basically a kind person who just needed a ton of therapy and maybe some mood-altering drugs. Something to selectively inhibit the voracious reuptake of serotonin that was obviously going on inside his skull 24/7. She felt bad about the fact that he was in love with her and that she found him deeply unsexy, but not that bad. Honestly, he was decent looking, better looking than he thought he was, but that moody boy man and fillery shit cut like zero ice with her, and she was smart enough to know whose problem that was, and it wasn't hers. When he came back in March, there was something different about him, something otherworldly and glittery-eyed. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. He had seen things. There was a smell coming off his fingers, the smell you got after they ran the really big Van de Graaff generator at the Science Museum. This was a man who had handled lightning. They all went down to the boat launch on the Gowanus Canal, and she smoked cigarette after cigarette, and she just looked at him. And she knew. He'd gone through to the other side, and she'd been left behind. Thank you. Well, should we talk about our grandparents?
Yes, and I should say that this is something that David Levinson, who's a scholastic editor and a really awesome writer, does whenever he does Q&As or conversations, and it's just such a neat trick. I liked it. So, what do your grandparents do?
I'm gonna go first. Well, I had 4 of them. I guess the thing to say about them, they were all working class. On my mother's side, they were English. My mom grew up in London. Her dad was a soldier who I never met. Apparently, he was an asshole. But I sort of was I owed my life. And my mom's mom was named Queenie, which is a name that people are not named often enough anymore. Queenie Spanky. On my father's side, they were car salesmen. There's still, in fact, if you go to St. Paul, Minnesota, for some reason, you can still find Grossman Chevrolet in St. Paul, which is the family business. It has been devoured now by some larger entity, but it still kind of is inside that entity being digested and exists as a brand. I guess the only thing I would add to that is, I didn't know my grandparents well, but none of them went to college, and my father and mother were the first people from their families to go to college. And you know how when people sort of, I don't know, they sort of jump a rung on some sort of status ladder like that. They become extremely fanatical about it. My parents are both English professors, and they are sort of fanatically high culture people. I think because they came from such a bourgeois to lower middle class background, which explains why I was sort of force-fed any number of literary classics at an age where I was totally unequipped to enjoy them in any way. Which is why I decided to ruin my life by being a fantasy writer.
My mom's father was a Marine and had a construction company.
He was a Marine?
He was a Marine.
What did he find?
He was in Japan.
In
World War II.
I guess.
Yeah. And I think he was actually on one of the ships where they watched one of the atom bombs being tested, so which must have been an incredible thing to see. And my dad's father it's actually unclear what he did. He lived in Miami. He probably did some smuggling, Cuba, and he went to a lot of racetracks. Unclear.
Right.
Probably cigarettes. And he played a lot of golf. He played golf with Johnny Weissmuller.
Oh, Tarzan. Right.
Yeah. Which was, when you're a kid, that's the thing that your dad tells you later, and your mom says. And he also seemed to be a smuggler of some kind.
So he was sort of a man of mystery.
He was an interesting guy. I never met him. Yeah.
And your grandmother?
My dad's mother was a sweetheart, loved to read. Although, there's that moment when you're a teenager of my age and you've been reading Glenn of the Cave Bear and Belly of the Horses. You just found a lot of stuff about sex, and then you visit your grandmother and she's reading Belly of the Horses too. It's really a comfortable feeling. I think I know what's in that book.
What did your parents give you to read when you were a kid?
My dad was a minister. They played a lot of musicals for us. He really loved musicals, so we listened to a lot of musicals when I was a kid. And somebody at the seminary where he was a guidance counselor gave him Lord of the Rings. So he read that to me as he was reading it to himself. As far as I know, he did not cheat. I think he really went along as he read it to me. And my mom read me C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
That was great. And I have to say, I've read terrible books in my life, including when I was a kid. When I was picking up things like lace. And my mother never said to me, you should put that down. In fact, the only two books she ever prevented me from reading were Confederacy of Dunces and Lord of the Rings.
Oh, the Lev Grossman.
Yeah.
I remember that book so incredibly vividly, largely because it had a little teaser paragraph. You opened the book and there was a teaser paragraph on the right-hand side, and it was about, I think it was Frodo, and it was about sex with some sexy elf. And I just pored over that text, like Talmudically. I couldn't understand why that scene didn't appear in the actual novel. I felt so wrong. Obviously, I still feel some bitterness about it.
Did you ever read the whole thing?
I did.
Was it great?
Wait.
At the time?
Lord of the Rings
Yes.
or Lord of the Rings?
Yes, Lord of the Rings.
Oh, no, it wasn't that funny.
Okay, all right.
I was just looking for the sex bit. It was sort of just as clever as it had to be, but no clever.
Okay. Oh,
I feel like I read somewhere that when you were a kid, you visited an abandoned amusement park. Was it an Oz theme?
At the time it was not abandoned. At the time it was
This was a central question for me when I read this quote. Was it abandoned then, or has it been abandoned since?
It has been abandoned since. It's actually quite tragic. There were two theme parks, one of which may still be open in North Carolina. One was Tootsie Railroad, which was remarkable because you went to a Old West sort of can show, and there's always a lot of pubic hair on display. So we would sit there and look up and gaze.
Right, and then go home and make fun of the cave bear. Child made your hat.
And then the Wizard of Oz theme park, which was actually probably a really boring theme park. There was Yellow Brick Road, there was Dorothy's house, there was a musical, and I think there was a fight shop. And there were lots of people in costume walking up and down the road. I think the best part was that there were multiple Dorothys, or Dorothys everywhere you went.
Right.
So that was a little mind-blowing. But it didn't do very well. It closed, I think, maybe after like 10 years. And for many years then, what I had been told it was a hangout for people who used to just go there and smoke a lot of pot. And I think all of them took it as a really hard blow when they sold it off to be developed in the condominiums.
A real loss to the community.
Yeah.
And was it depressing as a kid, or was it a childlike sense of wonder inspired by it?
What I remember is that it was just really. There's also a gondola ride where you were in balloons, So all of it was okay. I think the thing that really seemed great was to get the chance to see a yellow brick road. To actually get to walk down that. And the house was cool because they actually did half of the house as a house pre-tornado. You then were shown a short movie in a dark room of a tornado. And then they led you out through the other door and it was a house after the tornado. Well, that was enormously appealing. It's great to see a house that's
That's a gifted piece of art design. You're underselling this. So have you ever used that in your fiction? It seems like one of those things that you would pillage.
I did pillage it just one time. You know, there was a long period where I think, should I use this now? And you know what, I should make myself wait because he is it once and it's gone.
It's true. I've become superstitious about those moments, and whenever I think of something, I never save it because I'm convinced at the rate at which my brain is degenerating, I'll never remember that again. It's the last go around for that particular memory, so I always stick it in as soon as I can.
Well, do you ever think I better use this because somebody else is thinking the same thought right now, and I've got to do it? Or
oh, completely. I mean, it took me 5 years to write The Magicians. It seems like such an obvious idea for a book. I was utterly convinced that I would be, completely scooped on it.
Well, I don't want to spoil either book for people who will be buying them and devouring them tonight, but did you know when you started the second, did you know when you ended the first book that Julia was going to be significant in some way as a character in the second book?
I didn't, to tell the honest truth. It didn't occur to me to write a sequel to The Magicians until the book had already been closed. It had been sent to the printers. It hadn't been published yet, but I was in that weird silent interregnum where your book's about to come out and sort of losing your shit. That only then did I start to think about writing a sequel. Fortunately, I left so many plot holes in the first book that there was plenty to write about. There was plenty of stuff that could be resolved. But even then, I had intended for Julia to have a chapter. I'm an obsessive outliner, and I mean literally, Roman numeral, capital letter, whatever. And so on and so forth. And I had one chapter aligned for Julia to explain what she'd been up to during auditions, because she spends most of it off stage. And obviously she's up to something, because she's completely transformed every time you see her. And I began to write that, and eventually it went on and ended up being half the book. But Julia, that's not how things usually work for me. Julia's kind of a rogue operator for me. And I don't know why. She doesn't act like other characters. She tends to turn up in scenes more or less unbidden. And when I just gave her a chance to talk, she started talking. I suppose it's possible that my genius subconscious, which I can't access, had left all that stuff lying around for the sequel. But I was so unconfident that The Magicians would be published when I was writing it, that it seemed like tempting the gods to start thinking about a sequel. There was a strong possibility of jinxing there also. So yeah, I fit in afterwards. Of course, once the book was published, I thought, God, if only I changed one sentence, I could do this really cool thing in the sequel. William Gibson once told me that at the end of Neuromancer, the last line of Neuromancer, which I really butcher, but something on the order of, and Case never saw Molly again. And apparently when he was turning in the book, he thought, it's not going to be some bullshit sequel to this novel. So he wrote that sentence at the end just to preclude any possible sequel. Then, of course, he turned into a trilogy. It was very frustrating that he couldn't get Case and Molly back in the same.
That's such a great last line.
Yeah, I know. He sort of suffered for it.
I guess you do suffer for the really good stuff. I love The Magicians, and one of the things I love about The Magicians is that it made me love the first book even more, to find out that there is this sort of alternate history. There's a character who, as you read the sequel, you realize that all this stuff has been going on that you didn't get to see in the first book. And there's a writer named Megan Whalen Turner who has a great series. It's young adult. The first book is called The King. The second, it's called The Thief, and the second one is The Queen of Atolia, or Atola, butchering this. But anyways, she said that she feels that what a really good sequel should do is reverse many, many things that you thought you understood about the first book in the series. And I felt that you did that in such a way that my appreciation of the first book was sort of my mind exploded. I really thought you must have been cunningly plotting that out all the way through the first book, because it was so beautifully laid in there. Because everything was set up to allow you to do that.
I had a model for that, and the model was, I don't know if you've ever seen the Deep Space Nine episode where they go back to the Trouble with Tribbles episode, and they're time traveling. Everyone's running around, just off screen in the original episode. And I always loved that episode so much, even probably more than the original. So I thought, well, what if we sort of just do what was going on just out of shot, and hopefully sort of change your understanding of what's happening in the shot.
I can't think of too many books in which you lay the second book over the first, and all this stuff sort of pops out. It's really a great experience. I felt like I was reading two books at once, felt getting really smart. I'm also amazed.
I wish I could take more credit for it.
Well, the third book better be really, really good.
I thought, well, maybe I should take this. In the beginning of the missions, you meet three characters: Quentin, and then James, who's Quentin's friend, and Julia's boyfriend. Julia and James and Julia were meant to be throwaways. They were never supposed to come back after that initial sequence. I wanted to be this kind of bait and switch where you almost thought that maybe they were the heroes of the book, and the camera was going to follow them, but instead it wandered off with this sort of depressive, irritatingly self-absorbed guy, and that's who you're stuck with for the rest of the novel. And now, of course, Julia became a major character in the Magician King. I thought, well, I could go back and take James. I still have James. I could do the epic of James, but I still think he was that interesting a part. I think he was doing exactly what